Pam here from Pam's Crafty Corner. Welcome back to my channel for another episode of Coffee, Crime, and Crafts. These are bi-weekly episodes where I discuss the details of a specific crime while working on a weekly craft project. Today we're going to be reviewing the old but famous case of Lizzie Borden. At first, I was unsure about covering this as I thought the story was already quite famous and well known. That is, until a discussion with a coworker kind of threw me for a loop a couple weeks ago. We were idly chatting when I mentioned that I had seen an article online that Lizzie Borden's residence was up for sale. His response was, "Who's that?" First of all, as a true crime buff, I nearly fell off my chair at the thought of that someone might not know of, or at least have heard of, the famous case of Lizzie Borden. So my response to him was, you know, Lizzie Borden. And again, I got this blank expression from my coworker. So I then responded with that famous rhyme, the one that goes, Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks, and when she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. This time, I was met with a blank but shocked expression, accompanied by the single word question, what? So that whole exchange ended with him Googling and me writing this week's episode. So without further ado, I already have my drink of choice. Today I am not having a coffee. I'm actually having a glass of pop. But we're going to go ahead and get to the fun stuff. So today I'm going to be working on one of my cross-stitch pieces that I have had for a while now. This is actually called the Tapestry Sampler, created by Pat Rogers. It's a chart that's been out of print for quite some time. I started it a couple of years ago on my birthday, and I'm getting down to the end of finishing it. I have the rest of it rolled up here, but basically it's the entire alphabet, and it has this really, really beautiful floral border around it. And the nice thing about this chart is, although it's fairly detailed, there's no back stitching. All of the depth created for the lettering as well as the flowers is all done with very specific shading in the colors of thread that are used. So I've done the outlining portions for a couple of letters already, and I'm just going to carry on with filling these in while we're chatting. I'll insert a picture as well of what the finished piece is supposed to look like. And I'm stitching this on a piece of 18 count oatmeal Aida, which is really old. I've had this in my stash for a long time. I actually had it to use for, I think, Christmas ornaments, and that was back in the day when I didn't know about serging my edges of my fabric or anything like that, so I had taped the edges. Now the tape has since come off, but it's been left with this gluey residue, which is preventing it from fraying. I'm not too worried about that because I've got plenty of leeway here. This is going to get cut off anyway when I go to frame it. So the question, I guess, is, did Lizzie Borden really take an axe and give her mother and her father 40 whacks? Well, we're about to find out, and some of the details of the case may actually surprise you. So Lizzie Andrew Borden, yes, she had her father's first name as her middle name. Just gonna get my thread started here. Lizzie Andrew Borden was born in Fall River, Massachusetts on July the 19th of 1860 to parents Sarah and Andrew Jackson Borden. Life for her father and mother was pretty difficult financially early on, but Andrew eventually became a successful property developer. He became president of the Union Savings Bank, as well as the director of Durfee Safe Deposit and Trust. By his untimely death, his wealth was valued at approximately $300,000, which is the equivalent to about $9 million today. Andrew was known for his frugality. Although he certainly had the means, he refused to spend his money on things that he felt were unnecessary. Their home, located at 92 2nd Street in Fall River, was located in a more affluent part of town, but it wasn't located in the more prestigious area that was known locally as the Hill. Although it was a fine home, it had no indoor plumbing, which Andrew considered to be frivolous. Now, Lizzie also had a sister named Emma, and she was born a few years before Lizzie in 1851. So she would have been 9 years older than Lizzie. Unfortunately, the girl's mother, Sarah, would pass away in 1963 when Lizzie was just 3 years old. The girls had a fairly religious upbringing. They were involved in church activities. They taught Sunday school. Lizzie was also involved with the Christian Endeavor Society as she got older, as the secretary-treasurer. And as a young woman, she also got involved in the women's Christian temperance movement. So in 1866, Andrew remarried. And he married a lady named Abby Durfee Gray. At that time, Lizzie would have been 6 years old, and her sister Emma would have been 15. I'm just going to tie off my thread here and rethread my needle. There we go. So that's all tied off, and I'm going to start my new thread here. I usually start with a loop start, where I have one piece of thread and I double it, leaving a loop that I can put my needle through, and that anchors it. And then I can just go on stitching. So we were talking about the girls' age when their father remarried. So Lizzie would have been 6 at this point, and Emma would have been 15. There was a great deal of tension in the house growing up, and Lizzie refused to refer to Abby as her stepmother and continued to call her Mrs. Borden instead. Lizzie actually felt that Abby had only married Andrew because of his wealth. By 1892, the relationships within the family had started to deteriorate. Lizzie was now 32, and Emma would have been 41. And they were not married. They were spinsters, and they were still living at home. And I think this catches a lot of people off guard because they think that Lizzie was actually much younger than 31. And I don't know if anyone really realized that Emma was, Lizzie was 32. And I don't think anyone really realized either that Emma was 41. So, like I said, they were older. They were still living at home. Lizzie had a bit of a hobby. She was fond of keeping pigeons. And in May of that year, Andrew had gone out into the barn and killed off several of the birds that he felt were a nuisance. Andrew had also started giving gifts of real estate to members of Abby's family. And he gave a house to Abby's sister. It was at this point that Lizzie and Emma were furious and demanded that Andrew give them the rental property that he owned, which was the home they had lived in prior to their mother's death. So Andrew obliged, and he sold them the property for $1, which the girls kept for a while. And then about, I guess a few weeks prior to the murders, they sold the home back to Andrew for $5,000, which he then continued to keep as a rental property. So by July of 1892, there had been some sort of family dispute. And both sisters left on an extended vacation to New Bedford to allow things to settle down. And they returned just 1 week before the murders occurred. When they first got back, however, Lizzie still stayed at a local rooming house for 4 days before she returned to the family home. I'm trying to keep my stitching in frame there, so I hope you can see it if you are stitching along on something you're working on. On the evening of August 3rd, Lizzie and Emma's uncle, John Morse, who was their mother's brother, so he was their maternal uncle, visited the house, and he was asked to stay on overnight so that he could discuss some business matters with Andrew the following day. John was put up in the guest room for the evening, and the following morning on August 4th, John and Andrew went to the sitting room to talk for an hour or so. John then left the residence to run errands, and he planned to return to the house around lunchtime. It was at that point that Andrew left for his usual morning walk. And that would have been around 9 a.m., according to, I guess, the timeline that was set up after the murders occurred. So it was usual for him to take a stroll around 9. Abby had gone to tidy the guest room somewhere between 9 a.m. and 10:30. So this is the time frame that it's believed that Abby was actually killed, while she had gone upstairs to tidy away the guest bedroom. She was attacked, and she was struck first on the side of her head, just above her ear. This blow caused her to turn around, and she fell face first to the floor just inside the guest room door, which was located at the top of the landing from the stairs, the main stairs in the house. Abby was then struck repeatedly from the back with 17 blows that were direct hits to the back of her head from a sharp object, believed to be an axe or a hatchet, as was documented from the autopsy report. So around 10:30, Andrew returned from his walk, and the main door of the residence was locked, and his key wouldn't work. It had been, I think, having some issues prior to this incident. The key would stick, or the lock would stick. So because his key wouldn't work, their housekeeper, Bridget Sullivan, who was known as Maggie Sullivan, she had to let him in. At that time, she thought she had heard Lizzie laughing upstairs. Once Andrew was inside, Lizzie appeared to greet him, and Andrew asked where Abby was. She told him that a messenger had sent word for Abby to go visit a sick friend, although I don't think it was elaborated as to who this sick friend was, just that she had received some sort of telegram or message, and that she would return later. Lizzie then followed her father into the sitting room, and she said in subsequent interviews that she helped Andrew remove his boots and put on his slippers before he lay down on the daybed for a nap. In crime scene photos, though, which I am going to post intermittently throughout this episode as well, some of them are a little graphic. So in crime scene photos, Andrew can actually be seen very clearly still wearing his boots. So that lends doubt to Lizzie's story and the way she recounted the events of that morning. At that point, Maggie Sullivan, the housekeeper, had not been feeling well, so she went to lay down and rest. As a matter of fact, days prior to the murders, people in the house had been violently ill. Now, the illness was thought to have been caused by mutton stew that had been left out. But Abby at the time had feared poisoning, reasoning that several people were known to be against her husband. So, focusing back on the morning of August 4th, Abby is believed to be out tending to a sick friend, although we know she's actually lying dead upstairs. Andrew is lying on the day bed in the sitting room, and the maid has also gone to lie down. Around 11 o'clock, or a little after 11, the maid reported that she heard Lizzie yelling from the main area of the home. And she was saying, "Maggie, come quick, father is dead. Someone came in and killed him." So Maggie rushed out, and sure enough, Andrew was found slumped on the sofa, and he had about 10 or 11 wounds from a hatchet-like weapon. All to his head. I don't think he had any defensive wounds on his torso. So, these wounds were also from a hatchet-like weapon. And as a matter of fact, one of his eyes was completely split in two through his skull, suggesting that he was indeed asleep at the time of the attack. There was no sign of any struggle, And at the time that Maggie entered the room, Andrew was still bleeding. So the attack had happened very, very recently. So the family physician, Dr. Bowen, was summoned to the house, and he pronounced Andrew's death. When questioned about Abby's whereabouts, Lizzie first reiterated that Abby had gone to see a sick friend, but she then contradicted herself, saying that she thought she had heard Abby return a little while ago and might be upstairs. Maggie, along with a neighbor, Mrs. Churchill, who had come over to the residence as well, hearing the commotion, the two of them started upstairs, and it was at that point they discovered Abby lying face down on the floor inside the entryway to the guest room. So let's turn our attention now to the events following the murders. Was Lizzie really to blame? Were there other suspects? And what sort of investigation and trial took place? The day Andrew and Abby were killed, police officers took statements from individuals that were present in the home. They noted that Lizzie seemed to be acting oddly and was too calm and poised given the gravity of the situation. She also gave contradictory answers to officers' questions. For example, at first she reported she had heard a groan or a noise before coming back into the house and finding Andrew. But 2 hours later, she told the police that she hadn't heard any noises before returning into the house. She also insisted that her stepmother, Abby, had been called away to a sick friend's. But then she said that she had thought that she had heard Abby return, even though Abby was not mentioned when they first discovered Andrew. Like, she didn't say to Maggie, "Where is Abby?" or "We need to let Abby know," or "Has she come back? Did I hear her?" She just sent Maggie after the doctor. Despite the inconsistencies and the fact that Lizzie was present at the time of the murders, no one did a thorough search of her clothing for blood stains or checked to see if the outfit she was wearing was the one that she had been wearing earlier that morning. And no one did a thorough search of her bedroom. The officers on scene didn't want to cause her any further distress. During a search of the house, the police did find 2 hatchets and 2 axes in the basement, along with a hatchet head that had a broken handle. There was a possibility that the hatchet head was indeed the murder weapon, as the break in the handle appeared to be fresh, and the hatchet itself had been smeared with ash and dirt, unlike the other tools they found in the basement. Almost as if it had been deliberately done to try and cover up the hatchet's use. Unfortunately, none of the tools that were found were confiscated at that time by police. It was just noted that they were there. Because there had been suspicion of family members being previously poisoned when they were previously unwell earlier that week, Dr. Bowen removed Andrew and Abby's stomachs during the autopsies, which were actually performed right there in the house on the dining room table. Like, I can't even imagine. You know, not only were these people murdered in the home in such a horrific way, rather than the bodies being moved after crime scene photos were taken and moved to a morgue or a doctor's office, he actually did the autopsies there in the house on the dining room table, like before they left the scene. I find that pretty disturbing, actually. So he removed their stomachs, and their stomach contents, along with the family's milk, was taken to be tested for poison, but there was never any poison found. Information also came to light during interviews that Lizzie had purchased hydrocyanic acid. I think that's also known as prussic acid, in a diluted form from the local drugstore. When questioned about this, she admitted about the acid, but said that it was only purchased so that she could use it to clean her furs. A medical examiner at the trial later testified that this product didn't have any antiseptic qualities, so it was thought to be odd that she would purchase it with the intended use of cleaning, of using it for cleaning of any sort. Okay, I'm at another end here. I'm going to end off this thread. Okay, so once things settled at the house and the autopsies were complete, a family friend named Alice Russell attended the house and decided to stay the night with Lizzie. The girl's uncle, John Morse, also stayed the night, but oh, I got a little knot now. Look at that. There we go. Hold that out. Perfect. He also stayed the night, but contrary to what many people thought, he didn't stay in the same guest room. He actually moved to a guest room that was located in the attic. Police also watched through the night, and one officer said that he saw Lizzie enter the cellar along with Alice at one point in the evening, and they seemed to be carrying out a slop pail, so nothing suspicious about that activity. But after returning to the house, the same police officer said that he saw Lizzie return to the cellar by herself. And although he couldn't ascertain exactly what she was doing, he said she appeared to be leaning over the sink for quite some time. The following day, on August 5th, John Morris attempted to leave the house, that he wasn't going to stay on any further. But he was mobbed by hundreds of people that had gathered out of curiosity and, I guess, outrage over the murders that had happened. And the police actually had to escort him back to the residence. On August 6th, so this is now 2 days after the murder, police returned to the house once more, this time to conduct a more thorough search. Both of the sisters' clothing, Lizzie and Emma's, was inspected, and the hatchet head that had the broken handle was confiscated at that time and taken for evidence. In the evening, the mayor of Falls River, along with a police officer, attended the residence in order to inform Lizzie that she was a prime suspect. She was not taken into custody at that time, though, and she stayed in the house again on the night of August 6th. So why she wasn't taken into custody, I'm not sure. I don't know if it's because they didn't think they had enough evidence at that time to arrest her, but they just informed her that she was the prime suspect and left her in the home for that night. I am done with that letter D, as you can see there. So I'm going to get my blue and start filling in this letter. So August 6th, she stayed in the house once again with Alice. And the next morning on August 7th, Alice walked into the kitchen to find Lizzie tearing up a dress. Now, when she was questioned about it, Lizzie offered the simple explanation that it was an old dress, that it was covered in paint, and that she just intended to burn it in the fire to get rid of it. Unfortunately, that dress was not saved as any potential evidence, and it was never determined if maybe it was indeed the dress that she had been wearing the day of the murders. So on August 8th, an inquest started into the death of Abby and Andrew Borden. And Lizzie was asked to appear. Again, she wasn't arrested at this point. She was just asked to appear at the inquest to answer questions and provide a formal statement of what had occurred. So Lizzie did appear, and although she had requested to have the family attorney present, her request was denied because there was a state statute at the time that I guess the state statute stated that inquests had to be held in private. So Lizzie's behavior was erratic at the inquest, even though she had been prescribed morphine to calm her nerves. She contradicted herself when providing answers to questions, and she also provided alternating accounts regarding the morning of the murders. Other than the previous inaccuracies that were already pointed out, during the inquest, she at first said that she had been in the kitchen reading a magazine when her father returned home. But she later said that she had actually been in the dining room ironing clothes when he returned home. The district attorney at the inquest hearing was aggressive and confrontational in his line of questioning. And when reviewing her account of the morning in question, she again changed her answer, and this time she stated that she had been coming from upstairs when Andrew returned. Now, she also said that she had helped Andrew remove his boots, but crime scene photos, at this point, it was pointed out that they very clearly showed that he was still wearing his boots at the time of his death. Now, I don't know if some of the inaccuracies in her testimony or her questioning at the inquest can be put down to the fact that she was lying, or if it can be put down to the fact that she was most likely high on morphine, which she was prescribed and being given to calm her nerves. So by August 11th, the inquest had ended, and basically they had decided that there was enough evidence and to warrant going ahead with trial. So Lizzie was served with a warrant of arrest and she was put in jail. The inquest received a great deal of press attention right across the whole country. And there was a large 3-page article written in the Boston Globe at the time, covering it. Her testimony, though, at the initial inquest also changed the minds of many friends and family that had been previously supportive of Lizzie and her innocence. And the statements that she provided during the inquest were later ruled to be inadmissible in court by the judge. But in folklore, it still carries a great deal of weight as a basis for the common belief that she was indeed guilty. And, you know, also led to the persistence of her being portrayed as being very stoic and having a very serious demeanor during the trial and not being very personable. So the grand jury finally convened on November 7th. So now we've gone from August to November. And began a hearing regarding the evidence. It deemed that the evidence was indeed sufficient to warrant a trial. And Lizzie was indicted on the 2nd of December, 1892. And her trial date was set to begin June 5th of 1893, almost a year after the murders. The trial took place in New Bedford, Massachusetts. 5 days before the trial was to start, another axe murder occurred in Fall River. A lady by the name of Bertha Manchester was found hacked to death in the kitchen of her own home. There was speculation that the crime was committed by the same perpetrator as the Borden murders because of the similarities. And this was also known and noted by the jurors. However, a Portuguese immigrant by the name of, and I'm probably going to murder this name, but anyway, Jose Carrera de Mello. He was actually arrested for the axe murder of Bertha Manchester, and he was convicted of her murder. And they say it was actually proven that he wasn't in Fall River at the time of the Borden's murders. But I wonder whether or not, if Lizzie isn't guilty, I wonder whether or not the perpetrator of Bertha's murder was the same as the Borden's murders, but this poor Portuguese fella was arrested and found guilty more based on the fact that he was an immigrant, not because he actually committed the crime. I don't know a whole lot about this Bertha Manchester axe murder, and I had never heard of it before looking into this Lizzie Borden trial. So anyway, I thought it was interesting though, because I'd never heard any information about this similar axe murder having taken place almost a year later. So throughout the trial, the hatchet head that had been found without its handle in the basement of the Borden home was argued to be the murder weapon. The prosecution put forward that the handle had been removed by the killer because it would have been covered in blood and was possibly discarded. A police officer who searched the residence testified that yes, they had found the hatchet head and it was indeed in the basement. He also testified that there was indeed a handle found as well, that it hadn't been discarded, but the handle was not taken into evidence. And then there was another police officer that testified that a handle had not been found and that it was only the hatchet head. So even the prosecution's side was kind of contradicting their own evidence. There was also no bloody clothing found at the scene, but Alice Russell did testify at trial regarding the incident that she witnessed Lizzie burning a dress in the kitchen stove on August 8th. And again, it was a dress that Lizzie insisted had been ruined by paint. There was a lot of testimony regarding the events of the morning and the location of Lizzie at the time of the murders. Maggie Sullivan, the housekeeper, testified that she had left Mr. Borden and Lizzie downstairs sometime after 10:30. He got home around 10:30. She left them shortly after that to go lie down. She also testified that it was about 10 after 11 that Lizzie had called out to her saying that her father had been killed. So that was about a half an hour after she had left them alone in the house. Lizzie's statement entered in court stated that she, after she helped Andrew settle in the front room, she left the house and went out to the barn for about 20 minutes. And there were actually witnesses that were presented at trial who confirmed seeing Lizzie walking from the barn to the house just after 11. So that kind of corroborated her story that she wasn't actually inside the house. She was out of the house at the time and then came back into the house to find her father dead on the daybed in the sitting room. So she called out to Maggie. That was about 10 after 11. She then got Maggie to run and get Dr. Bowen and have him come to the home. During the autopsy that was performed on site that morning, both Andrew and Abby's heads had also been removed. Again, grisly, I know. But that was done so that their skulls could be preserved and then held for evidence. And the damaged skulls were presented in the courtroom. And at that time, Lizzie fainted. As soon as they were brought out, she passed out. And I am going to include a picture of their skulls here. You can very clearly see the damage to the front of Andrew's skull through the eye socket and into the side of the head. And Abby's skull, you can see a very large area of bone that's missing on the back side of the head, where she had taken the majority of those 17 or 18 blows to the back of the head. The prosecution also tried to enter evidence that Lizzie tried to purchase the prussic acid before the murders and tried to pose the theory that she was actually going to use it to try and poison the Bordens instead of buying it to clean a sealskin cape that she had said it was for. But the judge ruled the testimony of the purchase inadmissible because it couldn't be directly linked to their deaths. And there was no evidence that they had indeed been poisoned. On June 20th, the jury was sent to deliberate on the evidence. And an hour and a half later, they returned with an acquittal. Lizzie Borden was not guilty of killing her father and her stepmother. The stigma of the accusation and the public rumor mill have since led to her being thought of as guilty in the court of popular opinion, though. And folklore has condemned Lizzie Borden to forever be thought of as an axe murderer. In actual fact, although Lizzie was the prime suspect for the murders, there were others that had opportunity and motive. Andrew was purported to not be a well-liked person. The girl's Uncle John was also a significant suspect. He had actually very rarely visited their home after his sister had died. And it was thought to be odd that he had shown up just the night before the murders happened and happened to stay at the residence. According to police, he did provide an alibi, and I'll quote, "He provided an absurdly perfect and overly detailed alibi when questioned of his whereabouts on the morning of August 4th. So his alibi that he gave, he had, it was so detailed, he was even able to tell them the specific number of the streetcar he was on at the time when he left to do errands. He had also made acquaintance with 6 priests while on the streetcar and had advised them of his intended errands for the morning in detail. It was just very odd. It was almost too precise. I'm just going to tie this thread off here before we continue. So another potential suspect in the murders was a man named William Borden. He was thought to be Andrew's illegitimate son. And there were rumors that he had unsuccessfully tried to get money from Andrew. In later years, the belief that he was Andrew's son was proven to be false. But I'm unsure if William Borden actually knew this to be the case in 1892. At that time, he may have actually thought that he was Andrew's illegitimate child. I didn't speak a lot about Lizzie's sister Emma during this episode, and that's because she was away in nearby Fairhaven at the time of the murders, which is about, I think, 15 to 20 kilometers away from their residence in Fall River. Some people speculate that it was indeed her who was responsible for the murders, and that she had returned in the morning, killed their parents, and then returned to Fairhaven to await a telegram notifying her of their death, and consequently used her trip being away in Fairhaven as a convenient alibi. There's also another theory that she actually had someone kill the parents for them. Although I'm not sure, I don't think that's, a feasible You know, why would she do that and make sure she had an alibi and not make sure that Lizzie had an alibi as well? Maggie Sullivan, the housekeeper, some people thought that she may have been a suspect at one point, but it was determined that she didn't really have any motive for killing Abby and Mr. Borden. I mean, she had some disagreements with them over work at the residence, but certainly nothing that there was nothing for her to gain by having murdered them this way. So she was ruled out as a suspect. So now that Lizzie was found not guilty, what became of her? Well, she first moved into a large modern house in the prominent neighborhood of Fall River called The Hill. She moved in there with her sister Emma. She referred to their home by the name of Maplecroft. It's actually that house, I believe, that's up for sale now, along with the original home. And I'll insert pictures of those as well. It was around this time when they moved into Maplecroft that Lizzie also changed her name slightly. She had been baptized Lizzie, not Elizabeth, but she started to go by the first name of Lisbeth and called herself Lisbeth A. Borden. The sisters gained a fairly substantial inheritance from their father's estate, but despite moving and trying to make changes in her life, Lizzie was still considered a social outcast. She did develop quite a close friendship with an actress by the name of Nance O'Neill. And at one point, she threw a party for Nance at their residence. And Lizzie started ringing there. Okay, so Lizzie threw a party for Nance O'Neill at their residence. And sometime after that, it was around 1905, Lizzie and Emma got into quite a heated argument. And Emma chose to move out of the house, and she actually remained estranged from Lizzie for the remainder of their lives. On June 1st, 1927, Lizzie Borden died of pneumonia. It was a rather insignificant death and was not publicized. There were no funeral details published, and only a few people who were close to Lizzie attended. Her sister Emma, who was now living in a nursing home in Newmarket, New Hampshire, she died just 9 days later from chronic nephritis. Emma had moved to Newmarket in 1923, trying to escape the renewed publicity surrounding both the sisters when a new book was published about the murders. The Borden home where the murders took place is still standing, and it's still in quite good condition. It was turned into a museum and also operates as a bed and breakfast. Several pieces of evidence from the 1893 trial are still maintained and exhibited by the Fall River Historical Society. As a matter of fact, as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, the home was recently put up for sale again, as well as Lizzie's home that she referred to as Maplecroft. So I'll leave you with a couple maybe lesser known facts about Lizzie and the Borden case. As I mentioned earlier, Andrew had several people he considered to be enemies. And there were also other people who had motive and opportunity to commit the murders. It's not often reported, though, that the sisters actually put up a reward for any information leading to the capture of the rightful murderer. They had put up a $5,000 reward, which was quite a significant sum at the time. While Lizzie was being portrayed at the time in the newspapers as a rather stoic and stern person, and she was then later portrayed like in more recent plays and TV and movies as actually quite awkward and unusual. She was actually quite the opposite. She had several friends. She volunteered at multiple events. She was a very active and participating member of several women's societies. She was pretty somewhat outgoing, really. Journals of Lizzie's lawyer were discovered recently, just in 2012. And the journals portrayed Lizzie as having grieved quite extensively over her father's death. There were accounts written in the journal that the lawyer had taken from family, neighbors, friends, that showed that Lizzie actually had quite a loving relationship with her father, and that he had indeed provided very much for both of his daughters right up until the time of his death. As a matter of fact, Lizzie had $1,000 of her own money in the bank at the time of his murder. Quite a substantial amount for an unmarried woman who wasn't working. She owned a home, which she rented as a source of income. She owned stocks. And as she was still living at home, she also received $2 a week in pocket money from her father. So money wouldn't have been a motive. Lastly, although there is the famous rhyme about Lizzie Borden committing the murders with an axe, the true murder weapon was never actually identified. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Coffee, Crime, and Crafts. I took a lot of time reading newspaper articles from the period, as well as some blogs and current articles written on the subject to try and pull this episode together. Please give it a like and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any upcoming content. I upload these Coffee, Crime, and Craft videos every second week, and I'm now due to upload a video showing all my craft projects and what my progress has been. So that should be coming up this week as well. I've also had a lot of people ask me about Darren's sweater that I made for him, the one that was based on the Ted Bundy sweater. I'll insert a few pictures here. I did finish the sweater. It turned out great. At least I think it did. It fits him really well for something I had no pattern for. And I'll put a few pictures here. If you want to help support my channel and the time it takes to research and prepare each of these episodes, feel free to check out the Buy Me a Coffee link, which I'll put in the description box down below. A coffee is always appreciated. And until next time, stay safe and enjoy your crafting.